Hi all, Ross here, Thomas Classic and Modern. Welcome back to the channel. We are continuing with our Gearbox strip and rebuild series. Following on from our last video, which included us building up the main gear clusters. All I have done since, as I ended that video, is I have sealed up and fitted the center oil pickup, and I've knocked all the lock tabs over internally and externally on the two big nuts. So all good. This section is going to be all about fitting the diff itself. So we're going to show you how we go about fitting it, how we seal the casing up, and how we shim up this particular type of bearing on the diff as well. Give you a couple of little pointers for that. If you follow the workshop manual, nowadays it's out of date. So let's get stuck in. So here we have our gearbox unit itself all built. We are now going to be concentrating in this area here, the diff. So for ease of assembly and probably for Kirsty filming, I will turn it up that way. I usually do anyway when I'm building them. So that is fine. So what are we going to do? Well, first thing that we need to do is take our fully rebuilt diff unit and drop it into place. When you've dropped that into place, make sure it is all the way over to the right hand side as you were looking at it there. So all the way over towards the clutch end and idler gear end. So just make sure that when you drop it in, it is as far over that side as you can get it. And the reason for that is when you come to assemble it, you are going to allow the diff side plate that goes this side with the detent, ball and spring and seal in there to push that diff over to its natural position. That will then allow you to shim this end of the diff correctly. So that's the first stage. Drop that in place. That is, I'm happy with that. That's fine. And obviously that's all registered, slotted in, job done. Next thing that we need to do is we need to get the actual diff housing, the rear diff housing, in place and snugged up. And I do this in one hit. So I put the sealant on, snug it up, hand tight, and then we start to work from this side. Do not torque up that diff housing yet because you need these bearings to be able to move in the gearbox casing itself. So let me get rigged up with some gasket sealant first of all. I've got all my fixings. They've all been through our cleaning process, so I'm all ready to go with that. I'll get some gaskets together, some gasket sealant, and the seal for this little detent, and we'll crack on with that. Okay, so here we have our diff housing. This has all been cleaned, which will drop on just like that. Okay, so first thing we need to do, as this is a later casing, 5626, and when we stripped it, no gaskets were present. This is going back together with no gaskets on this face, only sealant. And the sealant that we use for all of our engine builds is the Reinzer seal. Yeah, very, very good stuff. It is slightly expensive, but it is good stuff. So we use this on all of our engine and gearbox builds and anything else, in all honesty, thermostat housings, water pumps. How we like to do this is I spread a bead all the way around, just like so. Yeah, and I then spread it out with my finger. I don't leave that bead like that. Some people do, I don't. I've never had an issue doing it this way. I don't like lots of sealant on things, but this is the way that I've done it for God knows how long, really. And I've never had any issues doing it this way. And I find that it means you haven't got excessive sealant anywhere. Yeah, so just spread that around so it's a nice even coverage. Get that out of there. Well, there we go. That's what we end up with, ready to go on. One thing that I do as well is just here, there's a little step gap in the casing. Now you might remember that I told you that's where I generally put something in to lever the casing off. Just there, I put a very small amount of this sealant just on that corner. And that is only born through force of habit, because many moons ago, I had one leak from that corner. Yeah, most people will probably say, that doesn't do anything. What do you bother doing that for? Just one of those things. It's a force of habit. It's something I do. Lose my sacrificial gloves. And then drop on our casing into place. And then I'm going to get all the fixings in there and just start them finger tight. Reusing our lock tabs. And I'm just going to wind those down with a ratchet. And you will see that start to come down. And you'll see the gasket sealant just start to squeeze out. Not great big dollops of it squeezing out everywhere. So wind that down. Just snugging it home. Yeah, this is not torqued up or anything like that. We're just winding it down to pull it into place. You want it somewhere near, but you don't want it absolutely tight, because as I said before, when we put this side plate on now with the detent and the little seal that goes in there, it's going to push that bearing over. Well, there we go, just nipped, just using the weight of the ratchet. Yeah, nothing mad, just stopped of its own accord. So next thing that needs to go on is our side plate, relevant for this side. Reusing, in this case, the one, you can see it's got a little bit of a witness mark there. That witness mark is where the detent, seal, and sleeve and everything has been sat. Okay, we've already checked these. These are nice and flat. No issues with those. Our detent, ball and spring. We'll get that in situ first. So in first of all with the sleeve. Then the ball. And the spring. Yeah. And then a little bit of gasket sealant again. On the O-ring. So I just put a little dab gasket sealant on the O-ring. Push that into place. That sits just in there. And then we need some gasket sealant on the side plate gasket. And I do very much the same. Squirt the gasket sealant, little bead of it all around, and just spread the sealant over the gasket. It's not a gasket replacement in this instance, it's just an assistance for sealing. Different people have different ways of doing things, as I say in lots of my videos. However, this is the way that I like to do it, and this is the way that I find works. So spread that out all over the gasket, nice and even, both sides. Pop that in place on our side plate. Just like that. And then we can get that in situ and start to wind the bolts in, and hopefully you'll be able to see, perhaps from the other side, the actual diff itself moving over. Line that up, and again, same thing again, just wind these in to get them all lined up. And the other thing that you have to do this side, often forgotten, is your second exhaust bracket, and that goes on these two fixings, just there and just there, with slightly longer bolts. There we go, that's all of those started. Just wind them up so they register. There we go, that's that snugged over. I am now going to torque that side plate up, and I'm now going to torque the diff casing itself up. 25 Newton meters for the diff side casing, 32 Newton meters for the larger bolts on the casing, and 25 Newton meters for the three smaller ones. That's next. So in the first instance, these ones on the side, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Then we go up to 32 for the bigger 9/16 ones. And back down to 25 for the smaller ones. That is done and torqued, that end. Nice, simple, easy operation. And now what I like to do is pop in the renowned selector seal, in this case aluminium bush, the later type, sort of anti-leak kit if you like. They were fitted as standard, so I'm going to fit the new aluminium bush and the new selector seal in there, and then what I'm going to do is knock over those couple of lock tabs. That is all of that assembly, or that little bit of assembly, done. We will then be concentrating on this end, which will be pretty much the same, but we now have some shimming to do with regards to the diff preload. And then all I do, suitable size socket, just tap it home. And then follow that up with a new rubber seal exactly the same thing. Suitable size socket, tap it home.
We're still recording? You want to know?
There we go. That is all that side of the diff done. Hopefully you can see as well how much gasket sealant has squeezed out around all of those gaskets. Yeah, next to nothing. So all the way around, just a nice even bead of that all the way around. So apologies if this doesn't work very well. I've just flipped this round to try and make it a bit easier for you guys to see, because I'm now working this end. So it'll be easier for my wonderful camera lady to pick up, hopefully. So, what are we doing here? What we now need to do is pretty much the same as we did with the main bearing retainer in the center of the gearbox. We now need to check what the clearance is between this plate and this machine face here. And the reason we need to do that is we need to actually, again, put a little bit of preload on those bearings just to hold them in place with this particular type of bearing. So first thing we need to do, get your nice clean diff side plate and offer it up. Yeah, and it should slot in the register and then give you just like that. So that's just like that. Bit of Tommy Cooper. So that there then is sort of held in that casing. We are doing the same here. So we are not tightening it up on the bolts. We are letting that sit where it wants to sit. We then need to get some feeler gauges and see what gap we've got around that diff side plate in a couple of various places. Okay, so we just go around in a couple of places. It's a very, very small gap in this instance. And if you hold some pressure on it, not jam it over, but just hold some pressure on it, you will feel, it's all about feel with feeler gauges, surprisingly. The clue is in the title. You will feel if you are pushing that side plate away, because when you hold it and you pull it out, you'll get a little click almost as it goes back up against the register. Yeah, but that's not doing that there. It's not doing it there. And it's not doing it there. So that, in a couple of different places, is a nice 5 thou. So, gap between that diff side plate and the casing is 5 thou. Great. So what do we do with that measurement? First thing I do is write it down. 5 thou. So that basically means if you were to torque that plate up on there with no gasket, yeah, you would have, well, you probably bend the plate for starters, but for purposes of explanation, you will have 5 thou of preload pushing against that bearing face there. Yeah, that's too much. We are looking for 1, 2 at the most. We now need to make the gap that we just measured the same as the compressed thickness of that gasket plus our, or should I say, less our 1 thou preload. Okay, so let's say, for instance, that this gasket was 10 thou thick and we had a 10 thou gap in there. We would then know that there would be 0 preload on the bearing, because 10 thou gasket, 10 thou gap negates each other. We then need a 1 thou shim to go in there to push up against that bearing to give us a little thousandth of an inch pinch. That is not the figures that we're dealing with. I'm just using those figures as easy figures to work with. Hope that makes sense. I might not be explaining it very well. Apologies if I'm not, but I hope that makes sense. So what we now need to do, we know that we have a 5 thou gap in there. We need to measure what the compressed thickness is of this gasket. Now, how I do this is with a set of vernier calipers. And what I do is I actually squeeze them as hard as I can against that gasket. Yeah, so that I can get an idea of what that gasket is going to compress to. These are only taught to 25 Newton meters. So they're not going to compress massively, but they do compress. So that is what I do next. And I'll show you how I do that. So we take our vernier calipers, set at 0, pop them across the gasket, so that you have quite a bit of gasket surface. So in other words, don't do it right across the narrow section there. Do it across a bit of the surface, So we're going pretty much right across that section of the gasket. So that gasket measures 16 thou, there or thereabouts, Then if we squeeze, compressed thickness of that gasket is 13 thou, okay? So we will use 13 thou as our compressed thickness of that gasket. Okay, so we have 5 thou gap and a 13 thou gasket. Okay, so I've just come to edit that video and I've realized a couple of things. One, I waffled far too much, and 2, my explanation of the diff shimming didn't really make sense to me, let alone probably anyone else. So I thought I'd do a quick interlude and I'll redo that little section showing you how we worked out what shims were needed. Okay, so basically we had 5 thou of clearance. We had a 13 thou gasket, 5 minus 8, see, done it again, look, thinking about what I'm doing. 5 minus 13 is 8. So we'd have been left with an 8 thou gap between the casing had we just bolted it all together. We are then looking for a 1 to 2 thou pinch, so let's say 2. So if I put 2 thou pinch, add those two together, we need 10 thou shim. Pop a 10 thou shim in, 8 plus 2 for our pinch on the bearing, 10 thou shim, job's a good one. Hope that is a little bit of a better explanation as to where we went with these figures. Hopefully that made sense. It's easier sometimes to do these things on autopilot than explain them. I'm not a teacher by any way, shape or form, but hopefully that made sense to you. Little dab of grease on there, and that is where that shim fits. And that should hold itself in there now for us to just do our little bit of gasket sealant again. So exactly the same as before with this. Run a sealant all the way around. Spread the sealant all the way around the gasket, nice and evenly, both sides. That little bead that I put all around the gasket covers both sides with no problem at all. There we go. Pop that into place on your diff side plate again. This is very much rinse, wash, repeat. Line that up. Make sure that your diff shim hasn't come adrift. That's where the grease helps. Wind and start all your bolts. And then torque this up to 25 Newton meters. One, two, three, four, five. And there we go. That is our diff assembly, all fully fitted in place. I hope the explanation of the shimming came out okay. Apologies if it didn't. If you need any clarity on anything like that, please feel free to drop a comment in the video, and I will pick them up. I do try and respond to as many of your comments as I can. So thanks very much for that. Really appreciate it, and all the likes on the videos. What I'm now going to do is do the final assembly of this end here, which is the Speedo gear end. Come along for the ride. This is simple compared to what you've done so far if you follow this through. So let's get this Speedo housing assembled. Okay, so final bit of this little puzzle, Speedo housing. Much the same as everything you've done before. So first thing we need is our new gasket. Same again, I use the same application method for everything. Bead around and spread the gasket sealant around over all of the surface. Don't need to worry about covering completely that dead spot in there, it's just a void. So no point in rubbing it all up in this part here. But the outer of the gasket, right the way around, flip it over, make sure it's all nice and evenly covered. Just like so. Pop the gasket into position. Oh, I am working the wrong way round for my hands, but that just goes in position there, like so. Then take your Speedo housing, offer that up and get that into position. There are two locating dowels. That gets that in place. Our bolts, wind those in. Just like so. What I also like to do at this point, before I go torquing that up, so I just like to slide in your Speedo gear to make sure it's a nice fit through there and it locates in the main shaft, which that one does. So then we can go around and torque all of these up. 25 Newton meters. Oh, a couple more gaskets. One is the Speedo output teardrop gasket, as I call it. Get that one done. And to save myself some money on sacrificial gloves, we'll also do the gasket for the Speedo worm gear, which goes on that face there. We'll get that one done at the same time. Now, first of all, we'll get that one on. Again, just wind those in. That's all good. We'll drop that into position, making sure that it locates. And then we'll put in our Speedo cable assembly. So the cable nut and everything goes on there for the actual cable. Wind that in. Point to note, actually, just quickly, when you're assembling this, we see this quite often. This little horseshoe retainer, it goes that way. So it has a pronounced shoe at the bottom, this side. That helps to push that into the casing. So that is the way that goes around. We do see them quite often the wrong way round. But I torque those, as are most of the quarter UNF stuff. I just torque those to 12 Newton meters. So that's the same as the oil pump bolts. Yeah. Final thing to go on is the engine mounting spacer block at this end. And this is the one that you might remember me saying about with the big Phillips head screw in and the shake-proof washer. With that one in particular, I like to put a little dab of copper slip on it before I assemble it. So little dab of copper slip under the head just to stop it ever sort of seizing up on that fixing. Start that one in there. Long one in there. Long one in there. And then you have a slightly shorter one in the very bottom. And all of those are torqued to 25 Newton meters again. That is the finished article. That is our gearbox rebuild complete. If you bought a gearbox from us as a exchange gearbox, that is exactly what you would receive. The next thing for us to do now, which we're probably going to stick out there, we will film it because we've gone this far. We will film it. We now need to mask this off and paint it. I say we, that's the royal we. That'll be Kirsty's job. We're going to mask this off and paint it. The same with the transfer housing and the wok. So they'll all get 2 coats of etch primer and 2 coats of, we use aluminium wheel silver. Gives them a nice bright finish, makes them nice and durable. And obviously being etch primed causes no issues with paint flaking off and so on and so forth. What we'll do after that is we'll do a very short video on how to shim up your idler gears. That will then encompass all of your transmission rebuild before it goes back on the engine. So there we go. I really sincerely do hope you're enjoying these videos. I hope you're finding them useful. That's why we've done it. At the end of the day, If you're taking something from them, a little bit of knowledge, or a little bit of confidence to do these things yourself and keep your classic on the road, that is exactly what we're after. So hope you're enjoying them. Thanks very, very much for watching. Thanks to all you guys for subscribing. If you haven't, please do so. It really does help. And we'll catch you on the next video in this series. Thanks very much.